Hi everybody, I'm Dan Schmidt. Welcome to Deer Talk Now. Hey, I got the new Matthews Halon in my hands here, and it is a really cool new bow. You got to check it out. Go to Matthews' website to learn more about it. But how often do we do this? Most bow hunters go out every 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, and buy a brand new bow. Get all excited about it, and then run to the store or the department store and buy the cheapest arrows, cheapest accessories that we can find to outfit it. That's a big mistake, especially when it comes to arrows. It's no different than driving a premium car or a nice pickup truck. You're gonna put premium fuel into that vehicle. You gotta put premium fuel, so to speak, into your bow. That means arrows and crossbow bolts if you're shooting a crossbow. Today, Gary Cornum from Easton Archery is gonna tell us all about what you need to know when selecting arrows and crossbow bolts so you can become a more accurate bow hunter.
The number one misconception that I hear about arrows is size. When I go to a show or I'm talking to other bow hunters and they say, you know, what's my arrow size? A lot of times they confuse spine and size. So the spine of the arrow, that's the stiffness. And what you want to do is you want to match the stiffness or the spine to your bow setup. So if you're shooting more poundage, you need a stiffer arrow than somebody who's shooting less poundage. And that just matches up, because when you let that bowstring go, it's going to column load on that shaft. And you need enough stiffness. So you need to match that up. There's Easton charts, or you can go into your pro shop and find out what the right spine is. Now the size or the length is where you cut your arrows. So that could be, you know, 29 inches or 30 inches or 24 inches. It all depends on your arm length and how your bow is set up. So there are two important things that you need to know. Is that's your spine, or the stiffness that you need for your bow, and also your arrow length. And if you don't know or you're not sure, get into your pro shop and they can help you out. You know, and if you get the wrong arrow spine, that's really important, because it won't fly as good out of your bow. So you're going to have, you might have problems shooting broadheads, you might have problems grouping. It's just not going to get the right kind of arrow flight. And you'll see that sometimes when it's going to the target, the arrow might kick out, and as you see it fly down range, you're going to see the arrow do some squirrely things. So it's really important that you get the right spine or stiffness for your bow. You know, when I go to shows or I'm talking to other bow hunters and we're talking about arrow speed, a lot of guys are trying to, you know, milk every bit of arrow speed they can out of their bow. And in some situations, that's okay. You know, you might need something that's really flat shooting, but there's a couple other things to consider. One is kinetic energy. So when you shoot a really light arrow, you'll notice that your bow is noisier. What that is that's a lot of the energy, the potential energy of that bow being left behind. It translates into more bow noise. The other thing is, you know, as you're thinking about arrow speed, you're thinking, well, I'm going to get to the target quicker. And that's true in some cases, but as you get into farther shots and you get farther down range, a lighter arrow will lose its speed faster than a heavier arrow. So something you can look at and something to think about is arrow speed in terms of that as well. Now, what I like to do is I like to shoot a little heavier arrow. That absorbs more of the kinetic energy out of the bow, and that makes for a quieter shot. Also, as your arrow travels down range, it takes more of that energy and delivers it to the target, and that translates into better penetration. So that's a couple other things to consider. Another thing to consider is arrow diameter in all this mix. And a smaller diameter arrow flies with less friction, and it's more streamlined, like a race car. So when it does hit downrange, it's going to take more of its kinetic energy because it's going faster when it hits the target, and you're going to get better penetration for that reason as well. You know, kinetic energy is a term that we hear a lot about in archery, and it's really important, but a lot of people don't understand it. So one thing to talk about is, you know, how much energy and what does it mean for me when I'm, you know, out hunting? Well, your bow has a certain amount of energy regardless of how much poundage you shoot and how long you draw like this. There's only a certain amount of potential energy in your bow. And if you think about shooting a bow and just dry firing it, you're not going to translate any of that energy to any arrow, and you're just going to have, it's a dry fire. You're going to hear lots of noise. The opposite is if you took, say, something like a crowbar and shot it out of your bow. It would absorb all the energy out of the bow, but the crowbar would only fly a few feet. So somewhere between those two extremes are the arrows that we shoot. So when I'm thinking about a hunting arrow, I like to think of maybe shooting something a little heavier. What that does is it absorbs more of the potential energy out of that bow. You're going to get a quieter shot, but it's also going to mean more velocity downrange and more kinetic energy when it hits the target. And you need that energy to drive that broadhead through the target. That arrow is absorbing the energy out of your bow and delivering that broadhead to the target. And you want as much penetration, as much energy. And that's really important if you're shooting mechanicals as well, because some of that energy is needed as it opens those blades too. So when I'm talking to people, I say, there's a happy medium between really heavy arrows and really light arrows, but you might want to consider something just a little heavier for your next hunt. You know, when you're selecting an arrow for a specific broadhead, and in this case mechanicals, one thing I look at is I like to pick something a little heavier, like this full metal jacket arrow. It's got a carbon core with the metal jacket. Those combine for a little bit heavier arrow. And the reason I do that is a little bit of energy is needed to open those broadhead blades. So when you shoot something a little heavier, it absorbs more of the bow's potential energy, and that gives you a little more energy to open those blades and get the full penetration that you need when you're shooting mechanicals. In selecting arrows for crossbows, the big one is arrow length. Most of the arrows out there are either 22 or 20 inches. Now, if you have a 22 inch and you normally shoot 20, you can use that. But what I tell guys is make sure you check with your broadhead manufacturer or your qualified pro shop to find out exactly what length you need. The other thing is material. You're looking at different types of arrows. You got, carbon and aluminum. And really the big difference there is speed. The carbon is generally lighter and the aluminum has more kinetic energy. So the last thing that I like to tell people is the insert. You can go with heavier inserts like some of the carbon and the full metal jacket arrows. They have the brass insert available. That boosts your front and center, the balance point, and that helps your flight out. So you might want to look at that as well. So inserts, arrow length, and the material type are the three things that you need to check out. And check with your crossbow manufacturer as well to make sure you're getting the right crossbow arrow for your setup.
If you're a longtime deer and deer hunting reader, you will surely recognize the name Mighty Deer Lick. That's because this company is the original maker of real apple blocks, sweet corn blocks, acorn blocks, and sugar blocks. These blocks have the perfect 1-to-1 calcium-phosphorus ratio mixed with high-grade salt for superior antler growth. Mature wild whitetails shy from mineral feeders. The problem with dairy minerals is the salt leaches away when it rains, and the product becomes unpalatable to deer. This is why mineral blocks are so popular with large ranchers and farmers. By placing Mighty Deer Licks in specific areas, you can deter deer and wildlife from seeking salt on highways left over from winter road maintenance. When placed in backyards, they can offer fascinating opportunities for viewing all types of wildlife. Deer deficient in salt develop a craving for it. Like cattle, they may lick and chew wood, dirt, rocks, and other materials. These are manifestations of an unsatisfied craving for salt. In deer, inadequate salt intake results in decreased feed consumption and efficiency of nutrient utilization. For best results, feed Mighty Deer Lick all year round. It is truly the best, highest quality product ever developed for deer and wildlife. Check them out today at mightydeerlick.com.